So, full disclosure here, Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles was the game that convinced me to pick up a PlayStation Portable, video game handheld thing that I honestly had zero interest in picking up beforehand because there was nothing on the console that remotely interested me until that game came along, and considering what it was, I figured, hell, why not? Now in hindsight, I'm glad I made the jump, and I've since discovered a few games on the PSP that I enjoyed, but that's another story for another time, so let's get to today's subject matter. Released in 2007 by Konami, The Dracula X Chronicles is a remake of the original PC Engine Super CD-ROM game, Akumajo Dracula X Chino Rondo or Castlevania Rondo of Blood, as it's since been localized here. The original Dracula X was a game held in high regard as one of the best games in the Castlevania series and highly sought after due to its status as a Japanese-only release until the release of this remake. As an added bonus, Dracula X Chronicles includes a localized version of the original PC Engine release as an unlockable feature, along with the game's immediate sequel and perennial PS1 classic, Symphony of the Night, featuring a new translation and a couple minor additions here and there. So this really is a chronicle of that entire Dracula X storyline. Since this game's release, the original Rondo of Blood has seen a number of re-releases over the years, including the old Wii Virtual Console in 2010, the PS4 exclusive Castlevania Requiem compilation in 2018, the TurboGrafx 16 mini console released in 2020 when the world went to shit, and apparently there was supposed to be a limited run, limited edition, limited whatever, reproduction, Super PC Engine CD-ROM release. I have no clue what's going on with that thing, or if it's still a thing at this point, but at this point, it really doesn't matter. Dracula X Chronicles is a 2.5D reimagining of Rondo of Blood, basically recreating the gameplay, levels, and monsters of the PC Engine original and giving it a new polygonal sheen. You begin the game as Richter Belmont, a young vampire hunter who not only has to do the whole kill Dracula thing, but he also has to save damsels because that's the name of the game for this generation of Belmont. One of these damsels is a little girl named Maria, who serves as an additional character you could play as. One who shoots little animals, is a little more mobile, but also takes damage like a... never mind. Anyways, I'm not going to go through the whole rigmarole of Rondo since I just did that a video ago, so just go watch that and then come back when you're done. Or don't, I honestly don't care. Dracula X Chronicles is not merely a step-for-step remake of the PC Engine original, but rather makes subtle changes and tweaks to make the game feel like a whole new experience, and I'm not just talking about the move to polygons. Side note, I may be exaggerating on the whole new experience thing, but bear with me for a bit, yeah? For the most part, the game takes great lengths in recreating the levels and gimmicks of the original game. So anyone familiar with the original Rondo should be able to make their way through this one with some relative ease. And if that's all this did, then I'd be wondering why bother with this remake when you could have just released the original version as a digital download or something. However, there are some changes to the game that throw a curveball to that familiarity. Seemingly indestructible barriers are found at certain points, leading to alternate paths or hidden treasures, but you rescue the two damsels and you'll get charms that will allow you to destroy these barriers, one of which will even allow you to kill those pesky blood skeletons once and for all. There's a couple new boss battles thrown in along the way, and while there aren't any new levels to go through, the hodgepodge stage 5 dash has been reimagined as some underground ruins, which makes sense as the original version was just that. Hodgepodge random assets tossed together for a lark. Also scattered throughout the game are hidden collectibles you can uncover. Most of these are music tracks that you can not only listen to, but also swap out stage music, which is a neat feature. But also the two classic games are hidden in this fashion as well. Well, 3. More on that later. Yeah, so a part of me wants to imagine some people putting up with the remake until they were able to unlock the classics and then abandoned it completely in favor of playing these older games, and let's touch on these for a bit and before we get back to our regularly scheduled program. Yes, so as a bonus you get 2 classic Castlevania games to unlock. The original Rondo of Blood, upon which this whole remake is based upon, as well as Symphony of the Night. There's also this thing that's included for completion's sake that you play if you're playing it on a PC Engine with the wrong system card or whatever. I guess the world really needed to play this. Would have been happier if they included the SNES Dracula X instead of this, but whatever. So anyways, both Rondo and Symphony play as they originally did, for the most part. Rondo now has English dubs and translations, though you could select the original Japanese vocals if you prefer. Symphony's the more interesting beast here because it's seen a bit of a remastering. All the vocal performances and dialogue has been redone for this version, which I assume was done for consistency because most of the voice actors of the remake also do voice work for the redubs of the old games. Don't really mind this because at least the dialogue is better. Some would prefer the old dubs because it's iconic, classic, cheesy, meme-worthy, and any other terms you'd want to use to excuse total rubbish, but whatever, your mileage varies. There's also a couple additional bits here. Most notably, there's an additional boss fight with Maria where if you beat her, you get the glasses. Originally she just gave you the glasses. And if you beat the game, you could play as Maria with a code, who plays more like her Rondo counterpart in that she shoots birds and animals and stuff, as opposed to her Sega Saturn version where she shot lasers and shit. It's a totally fine version of Symphony, and I'll just leave it at that because we still gotta talk about Symphony. What fun is that going to be? And now we return you to our regularly scheduled video game. So in terms of gameplay, Chronicles is pretty much the same deal as Rondo. Richter can only whip two ways. He can jump on and off stairs, he can do item crashes, and also has a nifty backflip to evade attacks or reach higher ground. Maria also plays as she did in Rondo, seemingly game-breaking bird attacks and mobility offset by a lower resistance to damage. Level progression remains the same as usual. Each level has a regular boss and an alternate boss, and beating the alternate boss will net you a blue orb to advance you to the next alternate level. Small window of invincibility makes it easy to take multiple hits in a short span of time, and this remake sure does have a lot of earth tones. In short, Chronicles pretty much recreates Rondo's levels and gameplay almost to a T, but with some minor changes and additions to make it almost worthwhile. And for what it's worth, it's a good effort. Plays well, controls fine. Those familiar with Rondo should have no problem adjusting to Chronicles, while those who haven't will have a firm but fairish challenge ahead of them. Some enemies do feel a bit more aggressive here than in the original version, but maybe that has to do with the game feeling a bit slower, I should say, than before. Not necessarily sluggish, but just slower. Maybe it's the polygons, I don't know. Other than that, plays well enough, no real complaints otherwise. That having been said, part of me feels there was a bit of a missed opportunity to do a little more with the game. Maybe give Richter some of his Symphony moves from the get-go either, or by making them unlockable similar to the sound test records, or possibly including, maybe a new level or two, something to give it something special, really. Hell, you're redoing everything with polygons and you're including the original Rondo. You may as well do something to make the remake stand out on its own. I think there's no harm in taking that extra step to add a bit more to make this feel a bit more unique, but as it is, it's just fine. This being a remake, Dracula X Chronicles opts to step away from the original 2D sprite work and instead places the game in a 2.5D side-scroller type, essentially playing like a traditional 2D game, but making use of 3D polygons and visuals. The entire game's visual style has been overhauled as a result, and it looks meh. I suppose in terms of the set pieces, the level design, and some minor visual effects, it looks alright and does a fair enough job setting the overall tone and atmosphere of this newly re-envisioned, muddy-looking world. And for what it's worth, most of the levels do look a fair bit better than in the original Rondo. Most of those levels looked a bit bland and boring. And that secret stage 5 looks like a proper stage taking place in an aqueduct and not a bunch of assets whipped together in a hurry, so that's something. But when it comes to the character models, the heroes, the small monsters, the big monsters, and everything in between, I can't say I'm too impressed with how they turned out. The models themselves range from fairly decent looking to somewhat blocky and ugly looking, but they all seem to move and animate in a somewhat stiff, jerky fashion. There's no fluidity, there's no grace to the way these things move, and I get that this is sort of a minor thing to gripe on, but sometimes it's the littlest things that kills the mood. This being a portable game though, I suppose mood isn't a top priority. Complementing the 2.5D style is character portraits illustrated by Yama Kojima, the one responsible for illustrating a number of Castlevania titles, and I must say that these portraits are perhaps some of her better works in the series, if only because the male characters actually somewhat resemble male characters and not... Well, I guess I'll save that for the Symphony review, which... Fair warning about that, yeah? Along with new visuals comes new remixes of an old soundtrack, basically taking the original Rondo's score and recreating it in more of an orchestral style. And I gotta admit, the new soundtrack is pretty good stuff, which is kind of surprising for me since I wasn't a big fan of the original Rondo soundtrack. I liked it when it was on the Super Nintendo. Maybe this works because it doesn't sound like something best suited for an arranged album and it streams properly. That might have helped. But the new takes on the old standbys are pretty good, and there's even a couple new tracks added in for good measure. Well, mostly one new track and a couple more remixes from a couple other games, but still, it's something. As expected, Chronicles cutscenes feature voice acting in both English and Japanese, and it's about as good as you'd expect it to be. Not quite high art, not quite emotive enough, still has a bit of that echoey effect, but nowhere near as cringe-inducing as past efforts in voice acting have been. The new cast also redid the dubbing for the classic games as well, which is also fine. Overall, Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles for PSP is a solid package overall. I'd imagine most people, as I've said, would play the main game until they unlock the classics and abandon the remake completely, but the remake is pretty good too, despite some mild issues and maybe not enough done with it. While there's plenty of options today to get your vintage Rondo fix, Dracula X Chronicles is still worth checking out for the tweaks and additions added into the remake, and if nothing else, is a slightly better remake or reimagining of a classic game than Maverick Hunter X. Next up is Symphony. Now where's that flame shield?